What do you do when the man who comes home to you every night has another woman planning a wedding with him across town? Aurora didn't have days to process it. She didn't have time to fall apart. She had exactly 3 seconds, standing in a brand new office, facing a brand new colleague, to decide what kind of woman she was going to be. And she chose calm. She chose silence. She chose something far more dangerous than tears. She said, "That's a lovely frame." That's it. That's all she said, while her whole world was collapsing, while she recognized the watch she had bought him on their 5th anniversary sitting right there on his wrist in the photo, while she realized the cabin in the background was the same private lake house they had visited together just 14 months ago. She smiled, she shook hands, she sat down at her desk, and she started building the case that would eventually destroy everything he had stolen, everything he had faked, and every lie he had ever told. Aurora Hill walked into that boardroom weeks later, and in 4 minutes she ended him. Not with anger, with evidence, with patience, with power. The lesson here? Never underestimate a woman who chooses silence on purpose. Hit the like button if this gave you chills, and subscribe to Violet Revenge Stories for more stories about strength, truth, and justice. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power. This content was researched, built, and manually edited by our team to bring you meaningful lessons and real emotional value.
The first file Aurora Hill placed on my desk was a single photograph, printed on cheap office paper. Not of her husband, but of the other woman's desk. 3 weeks ago, this was ground zero. She didn't weep or rage. Her voice was like ice forming on glass when she described the moment she saw him, smiling from a silver frame, a man she'd woken up next to that very morning. For 21 straight days, I've lived inside that moment. I'm Tessa Wren, and my job is to dismantle lives like the one Everett Stone built. My client wasn't a woman scorned. She was a CEO planning a hostile takeover of her own life. And I was her weapon. I don't deal in heartbreak, I deal in evidence, and the evidence was beginning to form a horrifying, beautiful map. My work began where her composure ended, with their joint financials. Boston's Seaport District is full of men like Everett, brilliant, ambitious, and hiding in plain sight. Aurora's world had been meticulously ordered. His was a vortex of calculated chaos disguised as success. I ignored the family vacation photos and focused on the wire transfers. The first thread appeared on a Tuesday at 2 a.m., fueled by black coffee and a hunch. A $50,000 transfer to something called Stonebridge Holdings, LLC, an entity that didn't exist in their shared portfolio. The breadcrumb trail had begun. Her future was not a shared delusion. It was a marital asset that had been systematically liquidated. When Aurora first recounted the scene, she described the other woman's smile, bright, disarming, oblivious. She introduced herself as Delaney Brooks, Aurora had told me, her voice flat, devoid of heat. She was excited to meet me. The irony was a blade twisting slowly. My client felt no jealousy toward Delaney, only a cold, methodical pity. This young woman was just another fraudulent acquisition, a liability he'd procured with stolen capital. My job was to untangle the mess without destroying the collateral. The desk, Aurora noted, was a shrine to a man who was, legally speaking, a ghost. The second file on my desk was a stack of loan applications and investment documents. Aurora's signature was on every one. "I never saw these," she stated, pointing to a capital call from 14 months ago. I scanned her real signature from her passport, then the one on the document. The forgery was good, almost perfect. I sent it to my forensic document examiner. The report came back in 48 hours. Hesitation marks in the upstroke of the A in Aurora. Microscopic pen lifts inconsistent with her fluid, natural script. The shrine on that desk, the entire relationship, was funded by federal wire fraud. His private life was a criminal enterprise. Aurora had described the photo in excruciating detail. The Adirondacks, late afternoon sun, her husband Everett looking directly at the camera with a soft, private smile. A smile she knew, a smile she'd thought was hers alone. But my focus wasn't on his smile, it was on the date of the trip. I pulled the credit card statements for that month. The rental cabin on the lake, the expensive dinner, the gas for the drive, all paid for from a joint account. He hadn't just taken another woman on a trip. He'd made his wife pay for it. The shard of ice wasn't just emotional, it was financial. It was theft. That small, sharp intake of air Aurora described was the sound of a carefully constructed world fracturing. She said it was a beautiful frame, Aurora had told me, her voice tight with a control I deeply respected. She wasn't just observing a betrayal, she was gathering intelligence. When Delaney Brooks proudly said his name, Everett Stone, it became the cornerstone of my case. His full legal name, attached to a life he was not legally free to lead. Fiancé, a word that was, in this context, a confession. I mapped it out on my whiteboard. Everett Stone, husband, and Everett Stone, fiancé. 2 separate columns, one pool of stolen money. Aurora's recollection was surgical. She remembered seeing his watch in the photo. She'd leaned in, pretending to admire the picture, but she was confirming an asset. My job was to trace its acquisition. The navy-faced chronograph. He'd told Aurora it was a bonus. My digging proved it was purchased with funds diverted from their primary investment account, the same one leveraged by the forged signature. He wasn't just wearing a watch, he was wearing the evidence. The trip, 14 months ago, wasn't just a romantic weekend. The date corresponded exactly with the $50,000 wire to Stonebridge Holdings. It wasn't a surprise trip. It was the seed money for his new life, celebrated on his wife's dime. He told one woman he couldn't imagine life without her, while actively embezzling from the other. "He's very handsome," Aurora had recited, mimicking the flat, polite tone. "How long have you two been engaged?" She was a witness, not a victim. She was building the prosecution in her head. Almost 3 years. I drew a timeline. For 3 years, every last-minute business trip on his calendar lined up with a weekend trip with Delaney. Every client dinner matched a cash withdrawal used for dates. He wasn't building a future. He was servicing a second, secret mortgage on his life. He was maintaining 2 separate, expensive realities. While telling Aurora they needed to cut back, he was funding an autumn wedding for his other life. My job was to put a price tag on the lie. "Blackwell House," I wrote on the board, circling it in red. I subpoenaed their records. The $10,000 non-refundable deposit was paid by Stonebridge Holdings, the shell company I'd found on night 1. It was all connected. A quiet, beautiful start, funded by a loud, ugly crime. He wasn't just noise. He was a one-man conspiracy. And my client, his brilliant, composed wife, had unwittingly handed me every piece I needed to detonate it all. She saw the clouds, and instead of running, she started documenting the storm. The phrase, "I'm so happy for you," was, in Aurora's retelling, the final piece of confirmation. This wasn't a fling. It was a complete parallel construction. Delaney wasn't a mistress. She was a meticulously cast replacement. The feeling of a wall of ice was accurate. By the time Aurora Hill turned to her desk that morning, the plan was already forming. She wasn't just a director taking charge of a new team, she was a commander surveying the battlefield. She booted up her computer and my work began. Everett Stone thought he was a master architect. I was about to serve him with the demolition order. He built 2 lives. I would leave him with none. His world wasn't just going to burn, it was going to be legally and financially incinerated. We weren't just filing for divorce. We were coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Delaney Brooks wasn't the kindling. She was the star witness for the prosecution, and she didn't even know it yet. The welcome lunch was the first test of Aurora's resolve. She sat through it, listening to the team gush, listening to Delaney build a fantasy of a man who didn't exist. She ate her salad and took mental notes. While everyone toasted to new beginnings, Aurora was planning an ending. Every question asked of Delaney about the wedding was another nail Everett was hammering into his own coffin. The man who worked 80-hour weeks was, indeed, working them. He was managing 2 full-time emotional and financial portfolios, and his accounting was about to come due. Aurora listened to the fairy tale, knowing she had the ledger that proved it was a fiction. The white orchids, the anniversary dinners, the reservations, they were all real. They were just for the wrong woman. I cross-referenced the dates of those gestures with cash outflows from Stonebridge Holdings. He was a perfect partner, just not to the person he was married to. The stress he showed Aurora wasn't from work. It was the cognitive load of maintaining a massive, ongoing fraud. The spare bedroom paint nights were his reality. The fancy dinners were his escape, financed by her future. The Charleston Wharf. The moment Aurora mentioned it, I ran a property search. Unit 12B, purchased 2 years ago by Stonebridge Holdings. He hadn't just bought his fiancée an apartment, he'd used marital assets to buy a love nest under a corporate veil. Charcoal stone and brushed brass, all paid for with her money. His story about the broken water heater was a lie to suppress expenses at home while he was funding a gut renovation on a luxury condo. He wasn't practical. He was a predator, moving assets from one ecosystem to another, and I was about to make him extinct. For the last 21 nights, sleep has been a luxury I can't afford. My diet has consisted of black coffee and the cold, satisfying hum of a document scanner. It started when Aurora Hill walked into my office, her posture perfect, her gaze unwavering, and laid out the kind of betrayal that makes you question the nature of trust itself. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to methodically, legally, and publicly dismantle an empire built on lies, an empire built with her money. My first target was the ring. Not just a piece of jewelry, but Exhibit A in the case of Everett Stone versus reality. I found the transaction record, a $97,000 wire transfer for a flawless emerald-cut diamond. The funds were drawn from a joint investment account, an account Aurora believed was for their future, their retirement. Everett had sold it to the other woman, Delaney Brooks, as a grand romantic gesture. For Aurora, it was the first thread I pulled. The man despised ostentatious displays, or so he told his wife of 7 years. He built a narrative of quiet authenticity for Aurora, while simultaneously constructing a fairy tale for his fiancée. It was a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. He told Delaney their love was what mattered, then handed her a rock the size of a knuckle. The irony was corrosive. He told her it was an investment, a physical asset to represent their future. The paper trail told a different story. It was the liquidation of Aurora's inheritance, funneled through 3 accounts to obscure its origin before landing at the jeweler. The centerpiece of his fraud was Stone Vale Advisory. He told Delaney he was building it from nothing. I spent 72 hours tracing its incorporation papers back to a shell entity registered in Delaware, a ghost company with a P.O. box and a single director, Everett Stone. The $500,000 in seed money wasn't a business loan. It was withdrawn from his and Aurora's home equity line of credit. His signature was on the application, clean and confident. So was Aurora's, except it wasn't. I sent the document to my forensic examiner. The pressure, the slant, the microscopic hesitations. It was a masterful forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. He saw his wife as a resource to be plundered for the life he was building with someone else. My job was to turn his investment into his ruin. Then came the Astor Vale Partnership, the corporate crown jewel of his deception. It wasn't just a business deal, it was the final act of laundering both the money and his manufactured identity. He was using Aurora's capital to build a company that would then partner with the very firm she had just joined as senior reputation director. The audacity was breathtaking. I mapped the flow of funds on a whiteboard that covered an entire wall of my office. Stolen marital funds became the foundation of Stone Vale. Stone Vale's valuation was inflated based on the promised Astor Vale deal, and that deal would make him a legitimate, untouchable player. The name itself was a sick joke, a fusion of his last name and the company he was about to con. For 3 weeks, sleep had been a luxury I couldn't afford. My client, Aurora Wallace, sat across from me on the first day, her posture perfect, her expression a mask of glacial calm, and laid out the mission. I want you to dismantle him, not just his finances, his entire world. This wasn't about a messy divorce, it was a controlled demolition. Aurora wasn't a victim, she was a strategist, and I was her architect. I started with the money because they always get sloppy with the money. Aurora was brilliant. She provided feedback on the deck, sharpening his messaging, making his pitch even more compelling. She played the part of the helpful new colleague, all while we were coordinating with Astor Vale's general counsel, preparing injunctions, and drafting the divorce petition that would be served the morning after the gala. Her composure was absolute. She told me the story he'd sold Delaney, the clumsy girl with the flyers, the handsome stranger in a suit, the instant life-altering connection in Chicago. It was almost identical to the story he'd told Aurora 9 years earlier, right down to the city. He wasn't just a liar, he was lazy, recycling the plot points of his own life. He'd told both women they were the first person to ever make him feel seen. The man was a ghost, a collection of narratives reflected back at whomever was in the room. His only true self was the one I saw in the banking records and the forged signatures, a predator with a spreadsheet. The photograph on Delaney's desk became a symbol of the entire case for me. A silver-framed lie, a man with his arms wrapped around one future, his chin resting on her head, while his wife sat 50 feet away, funding the entire mirage. The quiet, methodical work of those 3 weeks was for Aurora, but it was also for the shattering of that picture. When Aurora first introduced herself, she was already playing a role. The calm, level voice of the senior reputation director, welcoming the woman sleeping with her husband to the company. She saw the picture and knew in that instant that this wasn't just an affair. This was a parallel construction, and it had to be demolished to the foundations. Every interaction from that day forward was calculated. Aurora matching her pace in the hallway, listening to Delaney gush about Everett's stress, was reconnaissance. She was gathering intel, confirming the depth of the delusion, all while we were building the legal cage around him. The idea to review the presentation wasn't a spark from Delaney. It was a carefully laid trap. Aurora had subtly guided the conversation, positioning herself as the exact solution Delaney needed for Everett's problem. It was a masterful piece of social engineering. Delaney held her breath, hoping for a favor. She had no idea she was handing over the murder weapon covered in her fiancé's fingerprints. She thought she was helping him lock down his future, and in a way, she was, just not the one he had in mind. Aurora's smile when she agreed to help must have looked like warmth, like relief. I know now it was the smile of a general who has just been handed the enemy's battle plans, the beginning of the end. It was the moment she knew she would win. It wasn't a friendship, it was an operation. And as Aurora told me over a secured conference line that night, he won't know what hit him. My job was to make sure the impact was legally, financially, and reputationally catastrophic. The gala was the stage. Every detail was planned. We knew he'd have Delaney on his arm in the emerald gown, a color chosen to match the ring, a bauble bought with Aurora's money. The symbolism was too perfect. This wasn't just a night. It was a closing argument delivered to an audience of his peers. We timed our strike to the second. We let the CEO, Mr. Harrison, who was now fully briefed, build him up. The brilliant founder of Stone Vale Advisory, Mr. Everett Stone. Let him feel the applause. Let him taste the victory. A higher climb makes for a longer fall. The kiss on Delaney's cheek was his final public act of perjury. "This is for us," he whispered to her, while the real us, his wife and her lawyer, waited in the wings, holding the detonator. Mr. Harrison's next words were the kill shot we had so carefully scripted. Announcing a partnership of this magnitude required the best, and so he was welcoming our new Director of Reputation Management. He paused for effect. Aurora Stone. The name dropped into the silent ballroom like a block of ice. Not Hill, Stone. A public, undeniable claiming of her legal name. The name on the forged documents. The name on the joint accounts. I watched from the back as Delaney's face began to crumble, the gears of a nightmare turning behind her eyes. I saw Everett's face. It was the beautiful, satisfying moment of utter ruin. The blood drained from his skin, the confident smirk replaced by the slack-jawed horror of a man who has just been publicly vivisected. His eyes, darting from Aurora to Delaney, were those of a cornered animal. Aurora at the podium was magnificent, poised, powerful, and in complete control. Her smile wasn't for the crowd. It was for him. A final, chilling acknowledgement before she brought the building down on his head. She thanked Mr. Harrison, her voice unwavering. She paused, letting the tension build, her gaze locking with Everett's. And I'm especially proud to support the vision of my brilliant husband. She let the word hang in the air. Our 7 years of marriage have been full of surprises. But Everett, this partnership is truly your masterpiece. Checkmate. Silence. A total void. Then the slow collective turn of 1,000 heads, a tidal wave of shock, pity, and fascination washing over Delaney Brooks. Her world hadn't just shattered. It had been an illusion all along. In my office, the whiteboard with the mapped-out fraud was wiped clean. My work was done. It all started with that photograph, the image of a perfect life that didn't exist. When Aurora first described it to me, the silver frame on the new girl's desk, the Cape Cod backdrop, the uncomplicated happiness, she wasn't crying. Her voice was cold, precise. It was the voice of a woman who had moved past grief and into strategy. His name was Everett Stone, and he was my client's husband. The tight, mechanical smile Aurora gave Delaney was her first move in a war she had just realized she was fighting. She saw the picture, and she knew. That night, she Googled my name. The next morning, she was in my office. For 3 years, Everett Stone ran 2 lives with the precision of a CEO, managing subsidiaries. I have the spreadsheets to prove it. He allocated resources, time, money, affection, based on a cost-benefit analysis of his own sociopathy. My job was to liquidate his entire emotional enterprise. And we did. For 21 days, I've lived inside a story. Not mine, but the one Aurora Hill laid out on my mahogany desk, a perfectly rehearsed duet of a life that turned out to be a solo performance. She told me how they met, how Everett Stone pursued her, how a first date bled into 12 perfect hours. He was her whole world, the foundation of her reality. And my job is to bulldoze that foundation and salt the earth where it stood. The future they planned was the blueprint for his fraud. A spring wedding, a honeymoon, and the crown jewel, a waterfront condo at Charleston Wharf, secured with a down payment that wasn't his to make. Aurora had paint swatches. I have wire transfer receipts. He'd told her, "I've got this." He was right. He had her signature, her trust, and access to accounts she never knew existed. His generosity was a financial instrument. When her brother Samuel needed help with his design business, Everett Stone created a retainer through a new venture. Seed money, he called it. I call it a money laundering pass-through. He wasn't lifting up her family. He was using them as a pipeline to siphon marital assets from his actual wife. The fractures were there in her narrative, hiding in plain sight. I logged them like evidence markers at a crime scene. Hushed calls on the balcony became Item A, burner phone activity. Impromptu weekend strategy sessions became Item B, falsified travel itineraries. Every canceled trip was a thread I could pull, and I pulled them all. He would neutralize her suspicions with expensive dinners and cologne-scented apologies. He'd look her in the eye and lie with a sincerity that could fool a polygraph. Aurora chose to believe him, because the alternative was unthinkable. My job is to think the unthinkable, to chart its course, and to make it legally actionable. The night it all detonated was the Sterling Gala. His company was celebrating a merger he'd supposedly orchestrated. As Aurora zipped up an emerald gown the color of his eyes, she was swelling with pride. He was the star, and she was the meticulously chosen co-star for this specific, fraudulent production. The ballroom was his stage. He moved through the sea of senators and chief executive officers with practiced ease, his hand proprietary on the small of Aurora's back. "This is my fiancée, Delaney," he'd said, testing out the name he'd given her for this life. She felt like the luckiest woman in the world, unaware she was a ghost at his feast. Then she saw the other woman. Her name was Claire Stone. In Aurora's telling, she wore a simple navy dress and looked utterly out of place. Their eyes met, and Aurora felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. What was his wife doing at a party for his girlfriend? The sheer audacity of it still chills me. When the company's chief executive officer, a man named Harrison, took the stage, the performance reached its climax. He praised the relentless drive behind the merger. Aurora squeezed Everett's hand, her heart hammering. He gave her a polished smile that was all optics and no substance. "And I want to single out one man," Harrison's voice boomed, "whose vision made this possible. Mr. Everett Stone." The room thundered with applause. Aurora was on her feet, clapping until her hands ached, her smile a mask of unwitting complicity. This was his moment. "Everett, get up here," Harrison beckoned. As Everett approached the stage, the chief executive officer raised his glass for the final toast. Of course, a man like this never acts alone. He couldn't do it without the rock-solid support of his incredible wife of 7 years. Wife. 7 years. The word struck Aurora like a physical blow. Her mind raced, trying to recategorize the statement as a mistake, a slip of the tongue. But the data didn't support that conclusion. The blood drained from her face as the applause around her became a muffled, distant roar. Please give a huge round of applause for the amazing Claire Stone. The spotlight swung away from the stage, landing squarely on the quiet woman in the navy dress. On Claire, his wife. The puzzle pieces slammed together with brutal force, the hushed calls, the canceled weekends, the second phone. It wasn't a parallel life, it was a leveraged asset. He was diversifying his portfolio, and Aurora was the high-risk, high-reward venture. The first clue had come from a colleague of Aurora's, a man named Liam, who saw a photo of Everett on her desk. A picture from Central Park, a perfect autumn day frozen in time. The image was a carefully curated piece of marketing for the lie. "He looks familiar," was all Liam had said. And he was. He was a prominent figure in finance, but he was also a husband who appeared on charity circuit photos with his wife, Claire. A simple background check, something a woman in love would never think to do, was the first thing I did. It took me less than 5 minutes. Our entire 3-year relationship was a fraudulent enterprise. The condo wasn't a home, it was a shell asset. The I love yous were verbal contracts for a deal he never intended to honor. In that ballroom, the whispers replaced the applause, and Aurora went from fiancé to collateral damage. $186,000. That was the number I uncovered first, the precise amount of the down payment. I traced it from a joint marital account belonging to Everett and Claire Stone, through a series of transfers designed to look like corporate expenses, into the holding account for Samuel's design business, and finally to the escrow for the Charleston Wharf condo. It was a clean, elegant, and utterly evil piece of financial choreography. He stood on that stage, his perfect suit suddenly a costume, as the most powerful people in Boston stared. Their pity was worthless, their curiosity a liability. Aurora wasn't just the punchline. She was an unwitting co-conspirator in a crime he'd orchestrated against his own family and his company. The buzzing in her ears was the sound of a world collapsing. I hear it differently. To me, it's the hum of the servers archiving the evidence I've compiled. The faces in the ballroom blurred for her. For me, they are a list of board members who will receive my certified report tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. That moment in the ballroom detonated her life. My job is to pick through the rubble, retrieve the black box, and use its data to ensure that the man who caused the crash never flies again. His fairy tale didn't just end, it became my airtight case. The balcony calls Aurora described were my starting point. With a warrant, I pulled the tower records. He wasn't talking to colleagues about a merger. He was coordinating with an offshore bank in the Caymans and reassuring his wife, who was at their home in Weston, that he was closing the biggest deal of his life. He was telling the truth, in a way. The Charleston Wharf condo was the key. He handled all the paperwork because it was riddled with forgeries. I sent 3 documents to my forensics guy. Aurora's signature on the initial offer was a pixel-perfect digital forgery. Her signature on the financial disclosure was a clever trace. He'd used her as a ghost, a name to attach to stolen money. Their night at the gala was meant to be his victory lap. The emerald-cut diamond on her finger was purchased with funds from a liquidated stock portfolio held in his wife's name. Every brick in the gilded life he was building with Aurora was stolen from the life he already had. "You are stunning," he whispered to her that night. It was the perfect line, delivered by a master performer. He wasn't building a life, he was staging a play, and when the curtain fell, he planned to be long gone, leaving Aurora to take the fall. But then the unbilled actress showed up. Claire Stone wasn't a client or a boss. She was the majority shareholder in the life he was trying to liquidate. She walked toward him not like a scorned wife, but like an auditor arriving for a surprise inspection. She ignored Aurora completely. Her voice cut through the noise. "Everett," she said, holding up a platinum wedding band, "you're a difficult man to get a hold of." My blood runs cold just hearing Aurora recount it. The sheer calculated nerve of that confrontation was magnificent. Claire Stone wasn't a victim. She was his reckoning. When Aurora tried to intervene, Claire finally looked at her, her expression one of clinical pity. "The only mistake," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable, "was my husband of 7 years, believing he could liquidate our marital assets to buy a home with his mistress." And with that single sentence, my client's case was born. And Everett Stone's life, as he knew it, was over. He just didn't know it until I finished my work. For 3 weeks, sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. My client, Aurora Hill, didn't want justice in a quiet courtroom. She wanted a public execution. And my job was to build the gallows, piece by meticulous piece, for a man named Everett Stone, who was about to learn that his 2 perfect lives were a single catastrophic liability. The first number I circled was $186,000, a wire transfer from a marital account to a shell corporation. It was the seed money for a lie, a condo, a ring, an entire fabricated future. By the time I was done, my whiteboard looked like the ravings of a madman, a web of theft connecting every thread of his deception. Aurora's first call to me came an hour after she saw the photograph on her new colleague's desk. Her voice was pure ice. She described the woman's bright, innocent smile and the silver frame. It wasn't the betrayal that she focused on. It was the audacity. He had placed his mistress 10 feet from his wife's office. The picture from Vermont was our first exhibit. I had it blown up analyzing the timeline. He'd told Aurora he was at a tech conference in Austin. The expense reports we later subpoenaed proved it. The entire affair was underwritten by marital funds, each kiss and smile a documented instance of fraud. "She's young," Aurora had told me, describing Delaney Brooks. "Polished but naive, the perfect target." In my world, that's not a judgment. It's a profile. Everett hadn't just chosen a mistress. He'd chosen a willing, unwitting accomplice for his own corporate infiltration. When Aurora told me she'd confirmed his identity with the word fiancé, the final piece of the personal betrayal locked into place. For me, it was something colder. Confirmation of wire fraud. That shimmering diamond ring on Delaney's finger? I had the exact transaction record from their joint savings account. Stoneville Advisory was a ghost. I spent 48 hours tracing its incorporation papers to a post office box in Delaware, and from there, to a series of loans. Every application was co-signed by Aurora Hill, her signature a near-perfect forgery. He didn't build a firm, he leveraged his wife's credit and identity to finance his escape plan. Trust is a legal vulnerability. While Aurora trusted him, he was draining their home equity line of credit. Those weekend partner retreats with no cell service, perfectly matched cash withdrawals and hotel charges hundreds of miles away, all paid for from accounts she believed were building their future. The day Delaney Brooks emailed Aurora the presentation was the day the case became airtight. Aurora forwarded it to me without a word. The metadata was a prosecutor's dream. It proved Everett had stolen the file from Aurora's personal cloud storage 97 days prior. He hadn't just copied her work, he'd stolen her past to sell his future. My associate and I spent the night cross-referencing the deck against a keynote Aurora had delivered 2 years ago. It was a 98% match. His brilliant strategy was a carbon copy of her intellectual property. We now had him on theft, fraud, and a half-dozen other charges that would dissolve his company instantly. I remember Aurora's tone when she saw the file. There was no rage, just a chilling finality. "He's presenting my work to my own employers," she said, "at the annual gala, in front of everyone." I didn't see a victim on the other end of the line. I saw a CEO about to orchestrate a hostile takeover of her own narrative. Her reply to Delaney, "I wouldn't alter a single thing," was our strategy in 6 words. We would let him walk onto that stage believing he was a genius. We would let him deliver the speech that would not only end his career, but also serve as a public confession, admissible and irrefutable. My gala prep didn't involve dresses. It involved coordinating with the event's audio-visual team. We embedded our own evidence file into the presentation sequence. While Delaney was finalizing a seating chart, I was ensuring the screen behind the podium was hardwired to my associate's laptop in the back of the room. Aurora's quiet observation of Delaney wasn't about office dynamics. It was surveillance. She documented every conversation, every proud mention of her fiancé. Each anecdote became a brick in the wall of evidence demonstrating premeditation and a pattern of calculated manipulation. My last text to Aurora before she walked into the ballroom was simple. "The floor is yours." He thought it was his coronation. We knew it was his tribunal. He put his hand on Delaney's back, a final perfect image of the con, just as the lights began to dim. Those trust metrics in his proposal were a masterpiece of irony. I had them highlighted in the dossier we were preparing to send to the SEC. He was pitching a framework for corporate integrity using a stolen document funded by spousal fraud. It was beautifully, poetically damning. Page 42, Prospective Strategic Integration, was the kill shot. We had the original file created by Aurora with a timestamp from 2 years ago. When that slide appeared on screen, our preloaded evidence would appear right beside it. His masterpiece was our Exhibit A. I watched the event on a secure feed from my office. When Aurora stepped to the podium first, I knew everything was proceeding exactly as planned. She didn't look like a wife. She looked like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. Everett's confident smile began to falter. "Partnership is built on trust," she began, and I could almost hear the snap of the trap. The split-screen display worked flawlessly. On one side, his stolen pitch. On the other, her original work. The 2 logos, Stoneville and her old firms, side by side. Checkmate. Her eyes found Delaney Brooks in the crowd at the exact moment she said, "It is, in fact, mine. Stolen. By a man I trusted." Every word was a legal hammer blow, establishing ownership, alleging theft, and identifying the perpetrator in front of over 200 industry witnesses. The dead silence of the room was our victory. He had nowhere to run, no place to hide. And then, the final, perfectly delivered blow. A man who, for the last 10 years, I have called my husband. The case wasn't just won, it was annihilated. The camera panned across the crowd, and I saw them all turn to stare at Delaney. The fool, the accomplice. It was brutal, but it was necessary. Aurora's public vindication required the public unraveling of his entire lie, and Delaney was the centerpiece of that lie. I thought of the diamond on Delaney's finger, paid for with a transfer from account number 7345. I thought of the condo, leased with a forged signature on a joint financial statement. Every piece of her life with him was a piece of our evidence against him. Aurora didn't just expose a cheater. She executed a surgical corporate takedown. By the time she walked off that stage, she had dismantled his company, voided his partnership bid, and laid the public groundwork for a fraud lawsuit that would leave him with absolutely nothing. While one woman was whispering on the phone about living in a movie, the other was on a recorded line with me, methodically detailing a decade of financial and emotional deception. 2 women, 1 man, and a collision course that I was being paid to navigate. The fact that Everett had engineered Delaney's hiring at Astor Vale was the linchpin of our corporate espionage claim. It was a textbook Trojan horse maneuver. He hadn't just supported her, he had weaponized her career to give himself an inside track. He didn't need a champion, he needed an unwitting informant, someone to tell him about the company's internal politics, its pain points, its key decision makers. Her devotion wasn't a bonus. It was the primary qualification for the job he got for her. My file on Delaney Brooks noted her as a key witness, not a co-conspirator. She was an instrument. Everett had placed her at the center of his triumph so that her success would be tied to his, ensuring her silence and complicity. It was his most viciously brilliant move. The image of Delaney giving a thumbs up while pointing to that stolen presentation is seared into my mind. In her pride, she was presenting my client with the murder weapon, complete with fingerprints. She thought she was asking for a simple review. I had just hung up with Aurora after our final strategy call. The line was quiet for a moment before she said, "It's time." There was no hesitation, no doubt. Just the cold, calm focus of a woman who had lost everything and was about to meticulously and publicly take it all back. For 3 weeks, my world had shrunk to the dimensions of a single case file, fueled by black coffee and the cold, quiet fury of my client. Aurora Hill didn't hire me for a divorce. She hired me for a demolition. My job was to meticulously unearth the 2 parallel lives of Caleb Hayes, and then, with surgical precision, make them collide. I got the final confirmation from the forensics lab and read the report twice. The digital signature metadata is a definitive match, the text stated, blandly technical. IP address and device ID trace back to the primary residence. I smiled, a rare and weary thing, and attached the file to the presentation. The case wasn't just airtight, it was a vacuum. It was 8 p.m., 24 hours before Caleb Hayes' life would be systematically dismantled on a public stage. I slid a file, not champagne, across my mahogany desk toward Aurora. She was the most brutally composed client I'd ever had, a woman who had seen the abyss and was now prepared to push her husband into it. There was no joy, only a grim, shared purpose. I had just spent 40 minutes walking her through the flowchart of fund diversions, from their marital accounts into his shell corporation, Apex Sentinel. I spoke in a calm, steady voice that laid out his years of betrayal. Aurora offered no tears. She watched me with the intense focus of a strategist approving a battle plan. "You're certain of the timeline?" "Aurora," I began, my voice even. "It's all here. The seed money for his company, the down payment for his mistress's apartment, even the engagement ring." I pointed to a highlighted wire transfer. "It's all marital property. It feels comprehensive because it is." "This isn't about vengeance. It's about restitution," she stated, her tone glacial. "If you saw the life we built, you'd understand. Stop seeing a victim and see a creditor coming to collect." She met my gaze. "I'm ready. Just be certain every exit is sealed." For 7 years, Aurora's world had been a partnership with Caleb Hayes. He was the son. When they met, he was 33, a rising star with a deep ambition she mistook for substance. He told her she was the only person who understood his vision. She told me he'd spent years building a facade, and she was its primary investor. She said he was a black hole. I believed her with every piece of evidence I held. "She's his fiancée, Paige," Aurora had told me a few days earlier, showing me a photo from a private Instagram account we'd uncovered. She said the name with zero inflection. She works in my division. He got her the job. He calls his company Apex Sentinel Group. Can you believe the nerve? I made a note. The sheer audacity was his greatest vulnerability. I nodded, feeling the universe was finally confirming what the evidence already showed. Caleb Hayes was a sociopath. Of course, he'd place his mistress inside his wife's own company. It was a power play. He's been working so hard to get this partnership off the ground, Aurora quoted, her voice dripping with irony. There was just some old paperwork he had to sort out. The old paperwork, I repeated, tapping the forged spousal guarantee on my screen. The one that illegally leveraged your shared brownstone as collateral for his fraudulent business loan? She gave a slight, sharp nod. He told her I was a distant memory from a starter marriage, an empty house. He told her he was lonely. I just nodded, my expression professionally neutral. It's fortunate that his arrogance gave us such a clear trail. My validation was a cold comfort. But as the weeks of our investigation went on, my questions to her continued, like tiny surgical probes. They were never emotional, just specific. Caleb's travel records show extensive trips, I remarked one afternoon, glancing at a spreadsheet of credit card statements. Was he in Seattle on the 14th of last month? For a conference? Her heart didn't do a weird flip. Her gaze sharpened. Yes, he was the keynote speaker. How did you know? I smiled faintly. I have a knack for cross-referencing alibis. The conversation moved on, but the date was now circled in red. The certainty was a low hum I couldn't turn off. It was the way the forged signature was time-stamped at 2 a.m., precisely when Aurora's flight to Seattle was in the air. It was the IP address matching their home network. I told myself this was what justice felt like, cold, hard, and irrefutable. I'd update Aurora at night and she'd listen, then say, "He thinks I'm a fool, Tessa. He thinks love makes women stupid." Then came our final preparations for the Astor Vale Gala. It was the biggest corporate event of the year, where they would announce the partnership with Apex Sentinel. It was Caleb's coronation, and Aurora was going to be his executioner. I spent 2 weeks building the perfect presentation, a deep dive into felony fraud that would play like a horror film for the board of directors. The night of the gala, the air crackled with money and influence. Caleb was a magnet, shaking hands with the city's elite, with his young fiancée tucked into his side. "You see?" I imagined him murmuring into her ear. "This is our future." I had never been more certain of a man's downfall. I saw Aurora across the room, a vision in black, speaking with the CEO. Our eyes met, and I gave her a small, imperceptible nod. The show was on. The CEO, Mr. Sterling, took the stage. He spoke of synergy in the future, then began praising the company's boldest new partner. He called Caleb Hayes to the stage. I watched, my heart rate steady, as the man my client was going to destroy stood in the spotlight, looking like a king. He gave his speech, thanking Astor Vale for their faith in him. "And to celebrate this new venture," Mr. Sterling boomed, retaking the podium, "I'd like to invite our own Senior Reputation Director, Aurora Hill, to say a few words about the critical importance of due diligence." A ripple of confusion went through the room. Why Aurora? She walked to the stage, graceful and calm, and stood beside her husband. He smiled at her. The perfect colleague. She did not smile back. "Integrity," Aurora began, her voice crisp and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous hall, "is about what is real, even when it's hidden." A massive screen behind her flickered to life. It showed a legal document. "For example," she continued, "the integrity of a financial statement, like the one submitted to Astor Vale by Apex Sentinel Group." Paige's smile started to look stiff on her face. Caleb had gone rigid beside Aurora. "A partnership," Aurora said, "that was funded by a $1.5 million commercial loan obtained under false pretenses." The document on the screen zoomed in. It was a spousal guarantee of commercial credit. The primary collateral for this loan was a brownstone in the South End. I felt a cold satisfaction, my slide, to leverage a marital asset. Her voice cut through the stunned silence. A business owner requires the notarized consent of their spouse. The document zoomed again to a signature line at the bottom. There, in clear black ink, was a name, Aurora Hill. "The problem is, I have never seen this document," she said, turning to look directly at Caleb. "Because I am Caleb Hayes' wife of 7 years, and that is a forgery of my signature." The room didn't just shatter, it imploded. Every head swiveled between the stage, Aurora and the stricken young woman in the emerald dress. The whispers started. "Wife? 7 years?" The screen changed again. It showed the digital audit trail I had compiled, an IP address, a device ID. The signature was executed at 2 a.m. on the 14th of last month, Aurora announced, her voice ringing with steel. From his home office computer, while I was on a red-eye flight to Seattle. Seattle. The keynote speech. The alibi. It wasn't a good memory. It was incontrovertible proof. Every piece of the puzzle I had methodically assembled slammed into place for the entire world to see. The old paperwork, the empty house, the storybook romance. It was all a meticulously crafted fraud. He wasn't a lonely visionary. He was a con artist and a husband. Paige stood frozen in her emerald dress under the soft glow of the museum lights. The most powerful people in the city were staring at her, their faces a mask of pity and morbid fascination. She was collateral damage in a war she never knew existed. Caleb was staring at me from the stage, his face a rictus of terror, his perfect world burning. But for my client, the world was finally being set right. The first time I saw the picture, I knew she was the key. It was buried in a hidden folder on Caleb's cloud server, a candid shot of a young woman looking at him with total adoration. Her name was Paige Larson. My job wasn't to feel sorry for her. My job was to understand her role in the architecture of his lies. She wasn't a co-conspirator. She was the foundation of his second life. My case against Nathan Reed began with a photograph. Aurora Hill placed it on my conference table, a simple 5x7 in a brushed silver frame. In it, Nathan beamed at a laughing blonde woman, the wind whipping her hair. "Nantucket," Aurora said, her voice like ice. "He told me it was a solo business retreat." For 21 days, my life became a split screen. On one side, Aurora's calendar of business trips and anniversaries. On the other, a timeline of a fabricated life Nathan built for his fiancée, Claire Abbott. While my client was closing a merger in London, he was at home with Claire, picking out a rescue puppy. Claire's deposition read like a fairy tale a child would write. "He was my rock," she'd insisted, believing herself the heroine in a grand romance. She was 28, bright, and completely blinded by the calm, grounding presence of a man who was, in reality, a sociopath. My job was to dismantle that story, brick by fraudulent brick. The Sterling Gala was meant to be his coronation. His firm was the lead sponsor. He was the philanthropist of the year. For us, it was the perfect high-profile kill box. There is no better place to ruin a man who lives by his reputation than in front of everyone who built it for him. I traced the wire transfer for the diamond necklace he gave Claire to a shell corporation I'd uncovered called Nantucket Holdings, LLC. He'd whispered, "Tonight is for us," to his fiancée, every word funded by capital stolen from his wife. Aurora's performance that night was masterful. She was a statue carved from onyx near the auction tables, watching him guide Claire through the glittering crowd, his hand resting possessively on her back. He was the spider, and she was waiting for him to finish spinning his web. The fiancé's instincts flared once. "I think your director has a problem with me," she'd murmured to Nathan. He waved it away with practiced ease. "She's just intense. It's why I hired her." He had no idea her intensity was the engine of his own destruction. The CEO's introduction was a symphony of lies, a man of integrity, of vision. I had a 3-inch binder on my desk detailing the 23 wire transfers Nathan had made from marital accounts, forging Aurora's signature on every single one. The MC read the line Aurora and I had personally approved. A true partner in every sense of the word. We watched on a closed-circuit feed as Claire, the picture of devotion, began to rise from her seat, a blush creeping up her neck. The bait was taken, and then the trap snapped shut. Please welcome his wife of 7 years, the brilliant senior director of his North American division, Aurora Hayes Stone. The name detonated in the silent ballroom. The world stopped. Stone. It was a public execution, and it was flawless. On screen, Nathan Reed's face was a mask of pure, primal panic. His hand went slack in Claire's, and my client, Aurora, began her long, deliberate walk to the stage, parting the stunned crowd as her cold, victorious eyes found the other woman. In that moment, the entire case crystallized. The Nantucket photo, the forged paperwork, the siphoned funds. Claire's fairy tale wasn't a storybook. It was Exhibit A in a multi-million-dollar fraud indictment, and the climax had just played out for an audience of 500 of the city's most powerful people. He promised me a future, Claire had said, her voice a ghost in the deposition room. He said I was the last piece of his puzzle. This wasn't a simple infidelity case. This was about leveraging deep emotional trust for calculated financial exploitation. It was a pattern. It all began with that single photograph on a desk, the ferry to Nantucket, the laughing fiancé. Aurora saw it and knew instantly. He was supposed to be in Zurich closing the Astor Vale acquisition that week, she told me at our first meeting. That was the first thread I pulled. The man's audacity was breathtaking. Claire had been offered a regional director position in Denver, a career-making opportunity. Nathan convinced her to turn it down. "You're my true north," he'd said, isolating her from her ambitions to make her a more compliant victim. Aurora's composure in the office was an act of supreme psychological control. Her watchful gaze wasn't pity, it was surveillance. She was cataloging every detail of the life he was building with her money, right down to the 3-carat diamond on Claire's finger, paid for from a joint brokerage account. The emails Claire sent trying to befriend Aurora were excruciating. She saw my client as an intimidating, aloof senior director. She had no idea she was trying to get coffee with the woman whose life she was unwittingly helping to dismantle. The irony was a razor blade. The most damning conversation was one Aurora had recounted verbatim. Claire, gesturing to the photo of Nathan, had said, "He's incredible, isn't he?" Aurora, looking at the face of the man who had stolen millions from her, simply replied, "You must be very proud." The final, cruelest touch was the gala dress. The investor showcase was the finish line. Claire, buzzing with nervous excitement, approached Aurora, torn between a sophisticated white sheath and an epic midnight blue gown. She was asking for fashion advice from the woman orchestrating her ruin. Aurora's counsel was surgically precise. "The blue," she advised. "White is for weddings, too bridal for a corporate gala." She was twisting the knife with a smile. "Midnight blue is powerful. It's confident. You are a lifesaver." Claire had beamed. She had no idea Aurora was handing her a costume for her own public immolation. The deep blue would ensure that when the spotlight of truth finally hit, she would be impossible to miss. My job was to excavate the truth buried beneath that blissful ignorance. While Claire was choosing a dress, I was in a secure data room, highlighting forged signatures and tracing laundered money through a web of shell accounts. Her fantasy was my billable reality. The night of the gala, Aurora was in my office sipping black tea, a glacier of calm. Across town, Nathan Reed was a bundle of nerves, a tiger before the hunt, as Claire described him. He wasn't the hunter. He was the prey, and the entire city was about to watch the trap spring. For 3 weeks, sleep had been a luxury I couldn't afford. The case file started with a photo from her social media, captioned, "The Big Night." In it, Everett Stone knotted a silk tie, his reflection captured in a vanity mirror. He looked composed, confident. I saw a man meticulously preparing for a character he was about to play. His performance, I discovered, was flawless down to the last detail. Text message records I subpoenaed showed him kneeling before her just minutes later. "Tonight the whole world is going to see the magic we've built," he wrote. He was scripting a fantasy, and the diamond he kissed on her finger was purchased with funds illegally transferred from my client's inheritance account. I spent a week reviewing her handwritten journals, submitted as evidence of emotional distress. How could I have ever doubted him? She'd written. In the margins, I penciled in dates, cross-referencing her declarations of faith with the wire transfers Everett was making to a shell corporation. Her destiny was a line item in his fraud. The downtown apartment was another key set piece in his production. The lease was in both their names. To Claire Thompson, he was the brilliant fiancé on the edge of a great triumph. To me, analyzing the property records, he was an embezzler securing a secondary residence with stolen marital assets. "It's going to be a perfect night, Everett," she had whispered to him. The doorman's testimony confirmed their departure. Her belief in that perfection became the cornerstone of our fraudulent inducement claim. The night was perfect, just not in the way she imagined. It provided us with an exact time and date for his deception. "I'm in charge of the brand strategy segment," she'd told him. An email chain I uncovered showed her diligently polishing the final pieces of his crowning achievement, the very speech that would annihilate her. He was using her intellect, her labor, to perfect his own betrayal. "They're so lucky to have you on this," he'd typed, a digital kiss on the temple. Her reply was tragically ironic. "Oh, I think we're both about to get exactly what we've earned." I highlighted that exchange in yellow. It was the kind of detail that resonated with a jury, the quiet prelude to the storm. My job is to find the mirrors in the illusionist's stage show. Everett Stone's particular genius was making his primary victim believe she was his co-conspirator. Her blind faith wasn't just his cover, he'd weaponized it, turning her adoration into his most effective shield. The stage was indeed set. The audience, a curated list of investors, was gathered, and Claire was the unwitting star, waiting for a cue that would never come. A text he sent from the town car was the height of cynical stage direction. "Front and center, everyone needs to see my queen." It wasn't a term of endearment, it was a tactical decision. Placing her in the front row, visible to all, was an act of breathtaking arrogance. The flashbulbs captured her smiling, oblivious, on the arm of the man about to publicly execute their life together. Security footage from the ballroom showed Everett navigating the sea of power and money. He wasn't just shaking hands, he was closing his final round of funding. Claire stood beside him, her presence serving as his most beautiful, silent, and convincing piece of collateral. He promised them the future, a visionary, a genius. To prove intent, I had to show that he sold the same lie to everyone. Claire's trusting presence was Exhibit A. She believed every word because, up to that point, she had no reason to believe her entire life was a carefully constructed lie. The fantasy he sold to the investors was the same one he sold to her, just with a different portfolio. He leveraged her vision of their shared future, a shimmering life under crystal chandeliers, as proof of his own stability and trustworthiness. Her love was his bona fides. If that showcase was a success, everything was a done deal, she wrote in her journal. He was right. A successful night would trigger the final wire transfers for the merger, funds he planned to divert before my client, his actual wife, could notice. He was about to get everything: the corner office, the board seat, the validation. His entire fiction was moments from becoming an unbreakable, legally binding reality. My job over these sleepless weeks was to prove that this reality was built on a foundation of forgery and theft. He was using his brilliance to build a new world for us. That sentence from her deposition captured the core of the deception. The forensic accounting trail I was mapping told a different story. His brilliance was a tool to systematically drain marital assets to fund his parallel life. The morning of the gala was frantic. Claire felt she was holding the trigger for the confetti cannons. In reality, she was holding the invitations to her own public humiliation, elegantly printed on cream-colored cardstock. The moment that brought Aurora Hill to my office was surprisingly quiet. Claire had approached her desk, buzzing with excitement. "Everett put me at the main table," she'd whispered. "After his keynote, he's going to bring me up on stage." My client said she just stared, feeling the ground give way beneath her. He had told Claire he wanted to introduce her as his founding partner, the true foundation of my entire success. It was a masterful, manipulative lie. He fed her ego, her dreams, making her believe the victory was hers, too. We played the keynote video during the deposition. Everett, dazzling under the lights, delivered his speech. Then came the moment. And now, my beautiful wife, Aurora Stone. The camera pans for a second, and you can see Claire's face. The perfect smile cracks, then dissolves into pure shock. That's when a case file stops being paper and starts breathing. The man's audacity was his greatest asset. Weeks earlier, a new analyst named Chloe Martin had noticed the framed photo on Claire's desk. Everett with his arm wrapped tightly around her. It was a portrait of a world Chloe knew to be a complete fiction. "You two look happy," Chloe had said, her voice carefully neutral. Chloe had attended a small company holiday party and seen Everett with his actual wife, Aurora. This quiet, polite observation was the first documented tear in the fabric of his story, a warning Claire was conditioned to ignore. Phone records confirmed he called Claire that afternoon. "You understand the way these investors' minds work, Dell," he'd said, using her nickname. He was leveraging her devotion, making her an unpaid consultant on the script of her own demise. "I'll make sure every word is perfect," she'd promised, the loyal partner. My forensic analysis showed that while she was editing his speech, he was logged into a banking portal, executing a transfer of $60,000 from a joint account he held with Aurora. The next morning, the official gala itinerary from Mr. Harrison's office popped up on Claire's screen. My investigators tracked down this email. It was a precise schedule, a blueprint for the night's events. At exactly 7:30 in the evening, the schedule listed the opening address. The name next to that slot was Everett Stone and Guest. Not a name, not a title, just an anonymous placeholder, a detail that was both corporate and chillingly dismissive. She saw it as their debut as a power couple. I saw it as a calculated move to maintain deniability. Keeping her name off official corporate correspondence meant that, in the event of any questions, she was just a date, not a partner with any claim to his success. He had the podium, the microphone, and an audience of the city's most powerful people. He was preparing to solidify a life built on my client's money and Claire's stolen dreams. My task was to dismantle it, piece by fraudulent piece. While Everett was rehearsing his speech, Claire was meeting her best friend, Jessica, at a bistro 3 blocks from her office. The table was covered in wedding plans. This meeting provided some of our most critical financial evidence. The instant he gets that promotion, we can put the down payment on the brownstone, Claire had said, her voice giddy with plans. The catering quotes, the save the dates, they were all artifacts of a future that never stood a chance. I subpoenaed the records for every vendor Jessica had sourced, the deposit for the wedding venue, the payment to the caterer. I traced every single dollar. They flowed from a private account Everett had set up, funded exclusively by illegal transfers from the marital estate of my client, Aurora Hill. It was not just infidelity, it was wire fraud. My hand rested on the 5 leather-bound portfolios, 3 weeks of my life, distilled into 72 pages each. They were the sum of Jonathan Sterling's wreckage, heavy with the weight of provable facts, a stark contrast to the whispered fears my client, Aurora Hill, had first brought to my office. "He thinks tonight is his coronation," she had said to me an hour ago, her voice a blade of ice over the phone. "Let him wear the crown," I'd replied, a smile touching my lips. "It makes the fall that much higher." Now I walked back from the window, the Chicago wind a restless thing against the glass. I am not a woman who deals in doubt. My job is to dismantle illusions, to replace them with cold, hard, admissible truths, piece by brutal piece. I had laid the kindling of his ruin with surgical precision. All that remained was for him to walk on that stage and strike the match himself. It was Thursday, 7 p.m., T-minus 1 hour until the gala. On my laptop, the master file was open, Sterling_V_Hill_and_Sterling. It was complete. It was a monument to his deception. I opened a prepared email draft. In the recipient field were 4 addresses: the chairman of Sterling Capital's board, the general counsel, the head of compliance, and a contact at the Wall Street Journal with a penchant for spectacular falls from grace. The 4th address was for Amelia Sterling's legal counsel. The subject line was stripped of emotion. It simply stated, "Urgent, due diligence matter, regarding Jonathan Sterling." In the email's body, I had written only 3 sentences. The attached encrypted archives contain irrefutable evidence of wire fraud, securities violations, and embezzlement of marital assets by Mr. Sterling. This scheme was perpetrated against his wife, Amelia Sterling, and his fiancée, my client, Aurora Hill. I would strongly suggest you review this information before the board's planned announcement at tonight's gala. I hovered my finger over the mouse. Not yet. The timing had to be perfect. Digital records are clean, but I needed him to see the narrative of his own destruction. I opened one of the white leather binders. Inside were not memories, but exhibits. 72 pages that chronicled a meticulously constructed lie. I flipped past the first page. Here was the full map of his greed. The wire confirmations for his shell company, Viridian Holdings, LLC, cross-referenced with plane tickets from his and Aurora's first trip to Milan. The loan application for his boat, the Aurora's Wish, with her signature. A forgery so precise it took our analysts 2 days to confirm. The blueprints for their future home, built on land purchased with funds stolen from his wife Amelia's portfolio. I had every transaction, every email, every lie, visualized in side-by-side chronological order. The foundation wasn't a fairy tale, it was felony-grade fraud. I closed the heavy binder. The truth, as I had built it, now had a physical weight. Aurora's text came through then, a report from the front line. Jonathan was home. The moment he'd walked in, she said, the air had turned electric with his tension. He didn't retreat to his study to rehearse his speech. Instead, he shadowed her in the kitchen, a predator sensing a shift in the terrain. He was too close, his arms caging her at the counter, his chin a dead weight on her shoulder. His breathing was a frantic, shallow rhythm against her ear. He'd asked about her day, about the mood at her office, about her schedule for the evening. His voice was a thick syrup of false tenderness, but his body was a coiled spring. He was a man who knew, on a primal level, that the ground was about to give way beneath him. He was searching her face for a tell, a flicker of fear, any sign that the woman he'd played for a fool was finally breaking. I had coached her for this. Give him nothing. She leaned back into him, a perfect portrait of adoration. She told him she was just imagining how proud she'd be when he was on that stage. She told him she wanted tonight to be absolutely perfect for him. He exhaled, a long, ragged sound of relief, and the pressure of his arms loosened. He bought the beautiful lie because his ego demanded it. He went upstairs to shower, utterly convinced of his dominion. Now on the phone, Aurora's voice was steady. The energy at her office had been a spectacle. She'd been a live wire all day, a masterful performance. She had arrived an hour early, radiating a nervous, brilliant excitement. She'd leaned over the partition to her colleague, her eyes wide with what looked like pure, unadulterated joy. "I can barely function," she'd whispered, a conspiratorial tremor in her voice. "Jonathan called on his way in. He said the gala setup is unbelievable. But that's not even the best part." Her colleague, a woman named Chloe, had turned, her face a mask of polite curiosity. This was the part of the plan I'd insisted on: social amplification. What's the best part? A devastatingly happy smile had spread across Aurora's face. He said if the board confirms him tonight, he's going to the podium during the reception. He's going to share some profound personal news with everyone. Chloe's interest was piqued, just as we knew it would be. The rumor was planted. He wasn't just getting a promotion, he was planning a grand romantic gesture. So when the CEO finally announced his name, followed by the name of his wife, Amelia Sterling, the silence in that ballroom would be a sonic boom of humiliation. It started with a photograph on her desk. That's what Aurora told me during our first consultation. Her composure a thin sheet of ice over a caldera of rage. A picture of her and Jonathan in Kennebunkport, his arms around her, the ocean wind in her hair. It was the anchor of her workspace, a public testament to the lie she was living. Then, the new senior director was moved to the pod across from hers. She saw her staring at it. Her expression was heavy, cold, and knowing. "That's my fiancé, Jonathan," Aurora had said, forcing a smile. "Tonight is a huge night for us." The woman had nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on his smiling face in the frame. "I'm sure it will be a night no one will ever forget," she'd said, her voice flat. The woman's name was Amelia Sterling, and that was the loose thread that allowed me to unravel it all. That whole afternoon Aurora played her part, a bonfire of feigned joy. She couldn't focus. Her mind was at the gala, imagining the moment he would announce their future. At 3 p.m., she told her manager she was leaving. She had to get ready to end his. She took a car to a salon on Oak Street. This was not a celebration. It was the donning of armor. I met her there. She wasn't preparing for a new chapter. She was preparing for war. I watched as the stylist gave her soft, elegant waves. She needed to look like the victim, like the woman you build an empire for and then betray. The makeup was soft, glowing. In the dressing room, she slipped into the gown, floor-length midnight blue. It hugged every curve. It was not a promise. It was a statement. This was the dress of a woman about to collect on a debt. She looked in the mirror and I saw a woman shimmering with cold resolve. I saw a consequence. By 6 p.m., as dusk settled over the city, she projected an unbearable sense of peace. It was the quiet focus of a hunter in the final moments before the kill. She waited in the foyer of the apartment they had shared. His car was on its way. He'd gone ahead, kissing her and whispering, "Tonight, Aurora, everything changes." The irony was staggering. Her VIP credential sat on the table. She looped it around her neck. It was a key to the execution chamber. Her phone buzzed, the Gala app. His company's name, Sterling Capital, glowed on the screen. So strong, so permanent looking. She dropped the phone in her clutch, gave the home he'd built on lies one last look, and walked out. The two lives Jonathan Sterling had so carefully constructed were about to collide with her hand on the detonator. The ballroom at the Mariner Tower was a cathedral of wealth and power. Aurora found him holding court, a glass of bourbon in his hand, looking like the king of a castle about to be stormed. He pulled her to his side, his arm a dead, proprietary weight around her waist. He introduced her to titans of finance, calling her his secret weapon. She stood beside him, a masterpiece of deception, a predator posing as prey, fully aware of the blade she was about to bring down. My phone buzzed, a one-word text from Aurora. "Here." I looked at my screen, at the waiting email. My finger found the mouse. Showtime. At precisely 7:30 p.m., our plan went live. From a comm station in a hotel suite 2 floors above the ballroom, I watched on a multi-panel monitor as Marcus Thorne, a key investor we'd briefed, took the stage. My heart was a steady, metronomic beat. This was my stage. He didn't introduce Connor Vance. He introduced the woman who would incinerate his future, my client. Aurora Wallace walked into that spotlight, a vision in black against the opulent gold of the room. I watched her move to the podium with a lethal grace we had rehearsed. It was surgical. Her eyes scanned the crowd, bypassing the target until the last possible second. Then they locked onto Connor's. I saw it happen on the close-up camera feed, the collapse of his meticulously crafted universe. Raw animal panic ripped across his face as the blood drained from it. He recoiled, his hand shaking so violently the ice in his tumbler chimed. His fiancée, Chloe Bennett, looked on, confused, her hand on the arm of a man who had already ceased to exist. Chloe's confusion was a calculated part of the collateral damage. From my suite, I gave the signal to the AV tech. Aurora leaned into the microphone. "Good evening." Her voice was crisp, unwavering. "We are here tonight to map the future of urban infrastructure. We are here to discuss vision and trust," she continued, her gaze of physical force pinning Connor in place. "This company is built on absolute integrity, and because that is our most valuable asset, I have a duty to inform this board of the truth about the man at the center of this proposal." The trap was sprung. At my cue, the feed switched. The screen behind Aurora filled with a scanned image I'd pulled from the Massachusetts State Archives, a marriage certificate. "The man you know as Connor Vance," Aurora's voice resonated cold and clear, "is legally Connor Dempsey, and he has been my husband for the past 7 years. I watched Chloe Bennett's face crumple as a gasp tore through the ballroom. Her world fractured on a jumbotron. Her fiancé was a fiction, and the proof was being displayed for 200 of their closest colleagues. He was never hers. He was a bad debt I was here to collect. The next slide was my masterpiece, a flowchart of financial hemorrhage. "Over the past 24 months," Aurora narrated, using the exact script I'd drafted, "Connor has siphoned over $186,000 from our joint accounts. He funneled this into a shell corporation, Apex Holdings, registered to Samuel Bennett, Chloe's brother, the brother of the woman beside him. A woman who was subsequently made a shareholder in a company funded entirely with our stolen marital assets." The tiny red recording lights of 100 phones blinked to life in the darkened room. The next slide appeared, a corporate filing document. A signature was circled. It was Aurora's, a forgery. We moved to the kill shot, the loan document. "His crimes didn't end there," Aurora said. "To secure a bridge loan, Connor forged my digital signature, illegally leveraging our home, a property held solely in my name, as collateral. I had spent a week with a metadata expert proving that one. The shriek that came from Connor was pure desperation. 'Kill the mic!' He charged the stage, but the security team I'd hired intercepted him seamlessly. 'This is a private dispute!' he screamed, his appeal falling flat against the granite faces of the board members. 'It ceased being private the moment you committed wire fraud and securities violations, Connor,' Aurora countered, her voice cutting through his hysteria. 'When you use embezzled marital funds and forge documents to legitimize a corporate bid, you elevate adultery into a series of prosecutable felonies.' My exact words. On cue, the ballroom doors opened. The company's general counsel, whom I had briefed that afternoon, entered with 2 other executives. The public phase of our operation was complete. For Chloe Bennett, the nightmare was just beginning. The chairman's voice was arctic. "Our auditors have confirmed the fraudulent documentation," he announced, his gaze fixed on Connor. "Astorvale is terminating all association with Vance Advisory, effective immediately." A 9-figure house of cards, gone. His empire was dismantled in under 10 minutes, but the final piece of evidence didn't come from my files. It came from the other woman. I watched, fascinated, as Chloe Bennett stood up, her face a mask of cold fury. The illusion had shattered, replaced by the devastating clarity of her role in his crime. She wasn't just a fiancée, she was an unwitting accomplice. A cold rage had replaced her shock. She pulled out her phone and walked directly toward the lawyers. "I have the emails," her voice trembled but carried. Every text, every promise about my fake equity and our future. I'm giving you everything. She was handing us the motive and the timeline, the final damning narrative of his calculated deception. Connor Vance, or Dempsey, visibly shrank. He was a ghost in a $1,000 suit. He'd lost the name, the money, and the women he'd used to build his fraudulent life. I didn't watch security escort him out. My focus was on the evidence. My part in the public execution was over. I left the control room and made my way through the stunned crowd. In the quiet of the hotel corridor, I met my client. Aurora Wallace was standing by the elevators, as planned. She finally allowed herself a sharp, triumphant smile. She hadn't just survived her husband's betrayal, she had systematically and elegantly annihilated him for it. This night was the culmination of weeks of my relentless, methodical work. I handed her the final file. Chloe Bennett's phone was already with our forensics team. I walked out into the cold Boston air, the wind off the harbor a clean, sharp sting. I didn't think about Chloe, the collateral damage. I thought about the case. His foundation of lies was rubble, and my client was free. As I took my first steps away from the wreckage I'd engineered, I was already thinking about my next case, another monster to dismantle. In my work, you learn justice isn't an emotion. It's a meticulously executed strategy. It's about ensuring the truth, in all its brutal detail, has the final, undeniable word.